He grabbed her by the arm in front of everyone and shoved her backwards so hard she slammed into the supply cart. Bedpans crashed to the floor. Major Halloway stood over Lieutenant Beatrice Galloway, his finger stabbing the air an inch from her face, voice loud enough to carry through every ward on that floor. "You are done. You are finished. Get this limping woman out of my hospital before she kills someone." He didn't reassign her. He humiliated her. Publicly. Deliberately. Like she was nothing. Like 8 months of saving lives meant absolutely nothing at all. 4 Marine helicopters were already in the air, and every wounded man aboard them was screaming the same name. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Angel 6's story can travel. The morning of April 14th, 1969, started the way most mornings started at the 95th Evacuation Hospital in Da Nang, with heat that felt like a physical weight pressing down on everything and everyone, and with the distant rolling thunder of war that never quite went away, not even in sleep. Lieutenant Beatrice Galloway had been awake since 4 in the morning, not because she was ordered to be, not because anyone had called her. She was awake because Private Danny Ruiz in Ward C had a fever that had been climbing since midnight, and the night nurse, a brand new arrival from Ohio who still flinched every time a mortar round went off in the distance, had not caught it. B had caught it. B always caught it. She was standing at Danny's bedside, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead with one hand and checking his pulse with the other, when she heard the squeak of boots on the linoleum behind her. Heavy boots. Deliberate steps. The kind of steps that wanted to be heard. She didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. Galloway. The voice belonged to Major Richard Halloway, Chief of Surgery, 95th Evac Hospital, 44 years old, 6'1", silver at his temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved specifically for the purpose of looking important in photographs. He was a good surgeon, Sheets would give him that, but he was the kind of good surgeon who had never once in his career questioned whether being good at cutting was the same thing as being good at healing. "Major," she said without turning. She finished checking Danny's pulse, counted to herself, wrote the number on the chart. "I've been looking for you," Halloway said. "I've been here," she said. "Obviously." He said it the way you say a word when you mean a different, uglier word. "The question I have, Lieutenant, is why you are here and not in pre-op assisting with the Henderson case. Because Private Ruiz has a fever of 103.8 and climbing," she said, finally turning to face him. He was showing early signs of septicemia. Whoever was supposed to flag that on the night shift missed it. Halloway looked at Danny Ruiz. He looked at the chart. He looked at B with the expression of a man who has just found a fly in his soup and is deciding whether to complain or simply remove it. "That's not your assigned ward," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not. So what you're telling me is that you left your assigned station. What I'm telling you is that this man would have gone into septic shock by 0700 if no one intervened." She met his eyes steady. "I intervened." There was a beat of silence. In another kind of story, in another kind of hospital, that would have been the end of it. The major would have nodded. He would have said something like, "Good catch," and walked away, and the morning would have continued. But this was not that kind of story, and Halloway was not that kind of man. He picked up the chart, looked at it with the slow, deliberate attention of a man performing authority rather than exercising it. Then he set it back down. "Galloway," he said, "I'm going to say something and I want you to hear me clearly." She waited. "You have been at this hospital for 8 months, he said. In that time, you have inserted yourself into cases that were not assigned to you on at least 4 separate occasions. You have questioned my surgical decisions twice in front of junior staff. And this morning you abandoned your post." He paused. "I don't care what your record looks like. I don't care what kind of commendations you brought with you when you transferred here. What I care about is protocol discipline in the smooth operation of this hospital. And you, Lieutenant, are a disruption." She said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that saying nothing in moments like this was its own kind of response. Halloway's jaw tightened. He didn't like the silence. He never did. Furthermore, he said, and here was where his voice shifted, not louder but harder, the way a surface gets harder when the soft thing underneath it has been pressed out. "I have serious concerns about your physical fitness for duty in this facility." And there it was. Bea felt something go quiet inside her. Not hurt, she was past hurt mostly, but quiet. The way the air goes quiet just before something changes. My physical fitness, she repeated. Your mobility, he said, and his eyes dropped for just a moment to her left leg. During a mass casualty event, I need every member of my staff to be able to move quickly, to respond, to run if necessary. He let the words sit there. You cannot run, Lieutenant. I can move at a pace that allows me to function effectively as a... You limp, he said, flatly, clearly, like it was a diagnosis. I've watched you. Every person in this hospital has watched you. And I will not have a nurse who cannot respond to an emergency with full physical capacity. He picked up his clipboard again. Effective immediately, I am reassigning you to inventory management in the supply annex. You'll assist with stocking and cataloging medical supplies. The supply annex, a shed behind the main hospital building, where nobody went unless they needed gauze or extra IV bags. Around them, the ward was not quiet. There were other nurses, an orderly. Two of B's patients' men who were awake and listening because there was nothing to do in a hospital ward at 0:30 except be awake and listen. One of them, Corporal Hayes, 22 years old, shrapnel in his right side, was staring at the major with an expression that had moved past confused and into something that looked a lot like fury. B looked at Halloway for a long moment, long enough that he shifted his weight slightly on his feet. Understood, she said. She picked up Danny Ruiz's chart, made one final note, set it back down exactly where it had been, and she turned and walked out of Ward C, and her left foot made its slightly uneven rhythm on the floor as she went, and she did not look back. Behind her, she heard Corporal Hayes say in a voice that was not quite quiet enough, "Are you kidding me?" And she heard Halloway say sharp and fast, "Eyes forward, Corporal." And then she was through the door and in the corridor, and the sound of the ward fell away behind her. She stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Her hands were at her sides, her jaw was set, and then she kept walking. The supply annex was a corrugated metal building, roughly the size of a generous garage, positioned on the northeast corner of the hospital compound. It smelled like rubber and antiseptic and old cardboard, and the single fluorescent light overhead buzzed with the specific low-grade persistence of something that had been about to die for a very long time. Specialist Arlen Kowalski was already there when B arrived. He was 20 years old from Milwaukee, and he had been assigned to supply inventory because, as he had told B once with absolute sincerity, "I don't faint at blood, I just faint at a lot of blood, at a certain volume. It's a volume thing." He looked up when she came in, looked at her face, looked back down at his clipboard. "So," he said, "you heard." "I was there," she said. "Right." He turned a page on his clipboard. "For what it's worth, every single person in Ward C thinks he's wrong." "He's the major," she said. "He doesn't have to be right. He just has to be the major." She looked around at the shelves. Rows of supplies, some organized, some not. Boxes stacked in no particular order. "What needs to be counted?" Kowalski stared at her. "You're actually going to do it." "I was given an order," she said. "An unfair order. Most of the unfair things that have happened to me in my life happened because of an order." She picked up a clipboard from the small table by the door. "Tell me where to start." He handed her a pencil. "IV bags are a mess. Nobody's counted them in 2 weeks." She started counting IV bags. For 2 hours she counted. She organized. She relabeled. She identified 3 boxes of surgical supplies that had been misfiled and were about to expire. She found a crate of blood pressure cuffs that had been marked as damaged, but were upon inspection completely functional. She worked with the same focused, methodical energy she brought to everything, not because she had accepted her situation, but because the supplies still mattered, and the patients who needed them still mattered, and the idea of letting her anger become an excuse for carelessness was something she would not allow herself. At 9:15, the door to the annex opened and a face appeared. Sergeant Maria Delgado, one of the triage nurses from the main floor, and she was breathing like she'd run across the compound. "B," she said. "Maria." B didn't look up from the shelf. "Blood pressure cuffs in that box by the door aren't damaged. Someone should update the inventory." "B," Maria said again, and something in her voice made B look up. "You need to hear something." "I'm reassigned." "I know where you're reassigned. You need to hear this anyway." Maria stepped inside and lowered her voice even though there was no one close enough to hear. "Word just came through from triage. There's a broken arrow signal." B went still. A broken arrow. In military terms, a broken arrow was the signal for a mass casualty event. It meant the helicopters were coming in. It meant they were coming in bad. How many, she asked. 4 choppers, Maria said. Maybe more to follow. They're saying at least 30 wounded, possibly higher. Halloway is already setting up the OR rotation. 30 wounded, 4 helicopters. Bea looked at her clipboard, at the row of IV bags she had been counting. She looked at the single buzzing light overhead. They have everything they need, she said, and her voice was very controlled. Enough hands on deck. That's the thing, Maria said, and she hesitated, and in that hesitation was everything. B, I'm not supposed to be here telling you this. But you're here. I'm here. Maria crossed her arms over her chest. You've worked with the 3rd Marine Battalion before, last fall, the thing with the overrun firebase. B remembered. Of course she remembered. She would remember that night for the rest of her life. 3 men, B said. We lost the road and couldn't get the medevac in. I went out with the corpsman. 12 men brought back alive, Maria said. Because of you. She paused. Because of the nurse with the limp who kept her head when everybody else was losing theirs. Because of the woman those Marines started calling, don't be said, Angel 6. Maria finished anyway quietly. Be those Marines coming in right now. I don't know who's on those choppers. But I know what unit patch they're wearing. The 3rd Marine Battalion. The same unit, the same men or men who knew the same men. Men who pass stories around the way soldiers always do, because in a war zone, stories are one of the few things that still belong to you. B set down her clipboard, very carefully, very deliberately. Maria, she said, you should go back to your station. I know. If Halloway finds out you came to Maui, I know that too. Maria looked at her for a long moment, and then she turned and walked back out into the morning heat, and the door of the supply annex banged shut behind her. B stood alone in the smell of rubber and antiseptic and old cardboard. 30 wounded, 4 choppers, 3rd Marine Battalion. She picked up a box of IV bags and moved it to the correct shelf because they still needed to be where they were supposed to be. She updated the count on her clipboard. She was meticulous about it. Her hands were not shaking. She kept working. It was at 9:47 that they heard the helicopters. Even in the supply annex, even over the buzz of the fluorescent light, the sound was unmistakable. 4 rotors not in the clean formation of a scheduled arrival, but in the staggered, irregular pattern of aircraft that were running on fumes and willpower. One of them sounded wrong, a slight stuttering irregularity in the engine that B recognized because she had spent enough time near these machines to know the difference between healthy and not. Kowalski went to the door, cracked it open, peered out. Oh man, he said quietly, what do you see? One of them has smoke, not a lot, a little, coming from the tail. He turned back. They're landing hard. B was at the door before she was consciously aware of having moved. She looked out across the compound. 4 Hueys on the landing pad, and Kowalski was right. The last one in had a thin trail of gray rising from its tail rotor assembly, and it came down less like a landing and more like a controlled fall. From where she stood, she could see the main entrance to the hospital. She could see Halloway and 3 of his surgical team emerging in their scrubs, squinting into the morning light. She could see gurneys being pushed across the compound by orderlies. And then she could see the Marines. They weren't unloading. The doors of the first helicopter were open, and the wounded should have been coming off. There should have been a stream of stretchers, men being moved, the urgent, terrible choreography of mass casualty unloading, but nothing was moving. The Marines inside the chopper were visible from where B stood, and they were not moving. Halloway was walking toward the helicopter now. She could see his posture, the squared shoulders, the brisk walk, the body language of a man who was in charge and fully intended for everyone to know it. She couldn't hear what he was saying from this distance, but she could see his arms move. She could see the way the Marine in the helicopter doorway responded the shake of the head, the arms coming up the stance that said no. What is happening? Kowalski breathed beside her. I don't know, she said. But she was moving before she finished saying it. Not running, she couldn't run. And she had made peace with that, more or less, but moving with the particular efficiency she had developed over years of being unable to afford wasted movement. She crossed the compound at a pace that was not a run, but was faster than anyone who didn't know her might have expected. She was 30 yards away when she heard Halloway's voice carry over the noise of the helicopter engines. I am ordering you to allow us to unload these men. I am the chief of surgery of this hospital, and I am telling you that every second you delay is a second your fellow Marines are bleeding out. The Marine in the doorway, a sergeant she could see now with a bloody bandage wrapped around his left forearm, and the look of a man who had made his decision and was not going to unmake it, said something back. She was close enough now to hear pieces of it. Man, not moving anybody until hear me. Sir, not one of my men gets off this bird until... Halloway cut him off. Sergeant, this is a direct order. You can take your direct order and it's Sergeant O'Hara. We want Angel 6. The voice cut through everything. Calm, clear, like someone had reached over and turned down the volume on the world. It came from inside the helicopter further back. Not the sergeant in the doorway, but someone deeper in. We want the nurse with the limp, Angel 6. That's our condition. Halloway stared into the helicopter. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt much longer. B was 15 yards away when Halloway turned, and he saw her. And for a moment, the expression on his face was something she had never seen there before. Not anger, not authority, something more complicated than either. He stared at her. She stared back. Galloway, he said, and his voice had gone very flat. Major, she said. Around them, the compound had gone quiet in the way things go quiet when everyone is watching, but no one wants to admit they're watching. The orderlies with the gurneys had stopped. The nurses from the main entrance had stopped. Even the helicopters seemed to have gone slightly quieter, though that was probably her imagination. Halloway looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the helicopter, then back at her. His jaw moved. Something was working behind his eyes, calculation, pride, something harder to name. You're assigned to supply inventory, he said. I know where I'm assigned, she said. These men need to be unloaded immediately. It sounds like they have a condition, she said. She kept her voice neutral. She kept her hands at her sides. She did not allow herself the small victory of any expression at all. Sir, another beat of silence. The sergeant in the doorway was watching this exchange. Behind him, she could hear sounds. She recognized the specific cadence of men in pain, trying not to make noise about it. The compressed, careful breathing of bad wounds, 30 wounded, and they were sitting on those helicopters. Halloway's chin went up. His eyes went cold. And B understood then that whatever decision he made in the next 10 seconds, he would make it in a way that cost him nothing, or at least in a way that he could tell himself cost him nothing. Report to Helicopter 1, he said, and turned away before he finished the sentence. B was already moving. The sergeant in the doorway, his name tape read, Carter stepped back as she approached. He looked at her face. He looked at her leg. And then something in his expression shifted, not quite relief, because relief in this context would have required him to not have been terrified before, and she could see that he had been but something that moved in the direction of it. You're her, he said. You're the one from the fire base. I was at the fire base last October, she said. Is that what you mean? He nodded just once, but it was the kind of nod that had weight in it. What are we looking at in there? She said, stepping up into the helicopter. The smell hit her first. Blood and aviation fuel and sweat. 6 men inside, some on stretchers, some propped against the bulkhead, all with the gray undertan look of men who had been bleeding long enough that their bodies were starting to negotiate the terms. She moved to the nearest man, started her assessment with her eyes and hands before she had consciously run through the checklist, because the checklist was so deeply part of her by now that thinking about it separately would have been like thinking separately about breathing. Chest, airway, color, breath sounds. She moved to the next man, then the next, and in the back of the helicopter on a stretcher that had been wedged against the far bulkhead with a second Marine kneeling beside it was a young lieutenant. He couldn't have been more than 23. His face was the color of old chalk, and his breathing had the shallow, irregular quality of a man whose heart was fighting for real estate it was losing. She knelt beside him, his eyes opened. Dark eyes, very focused with the particular intensity of someone who is spending everything they have on the act of staying conscious. Angel 6, he said. It came out barely above a whisper. I'm here, she said. She put 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was there, rapid threadies, the kind of pulse that packs up and leaves without warning. Told them, he said. Told them to wait for you. I know, she said. That was incredibly stupid. She was checking his chest as she talked, her hands moving over his ribs, reading what her hands always read. Do you know what you're describing? Muffled heart sounds, he said faintly. Distended neck veins, pressure dropping. She looked at him. You know your medicine, she said. Pre-med, he said before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Before was before. This was now. She knew what she was feeling. She had known it from the moment she looked at his color. She said it anyway quietly, just to herself, or maybe to him, or maybe just to give the name to the thing, so it stopped having the power of the unnamed. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the sac around his heart, squeezing it, slowly, inexorably squeezing it until it couldn't beat anymore. She looked at the entrance to the helicopter where Sergeant Carter was watching her with the expression of a man who was braced. I need a 14-gauge needle, she said. Long. And I need it 2 minutes ago. Carter turned and started shouting without asking a single question. In the belly of the helicopter, with the morning light coming in at a sharp angle through the open door and the sound of the war still present on the horizon, and the young lieutenant watching her with eyes that were very dark and very awake, Beatrice Galloway opened her bag and prepared to do what she had always done. Not because she was asked. Not because someone had finally recognized her value, or reversed an unfair decision, or given her the authority she had earned. She did it because there was a man in front of her who was dying, and she knew how to keep him from doing that, and there was nothing more complicated or more simple than that in the whole world. Outside the helicopter, she heard Halloway's voice, giving orders, demanding updates, being very efficiently in charge of everything except the thing that actually mattered right now. She didn't look up. She focused on the young lieutenant's chest, on the angle, on the needle that Carter had just pressed into her hand, on the one thing that had always saved her from the particular kind of despair that came with being dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, sent to the supply shed to count IV bags. The work. The work was always there. The work had never once turned her away. She took a breath, she set the angle, and she began. The needle was in her hand, and the world had reduced itself to the length of 14 gauges and the distance between her and the young lieutenant's chest. She had done this before. Not many times. Pericardiocentesis was not a procedure you wanted to do often. Not in a field hospital, not in the belly of a helicopter that smelled like fuel and blood and 3 months of jungle. But she had done it. She knew the angle. She knew the feel of the needle finding its way through tissue, through the pericardial sac, into the collection of blood that was slowly, methodically squeezing a 23-year-old's heart into submission. Lieutenant Jonathan Thorne was watching her. His dark eyes hadn't left her face since she knelt beside him. You ever done this before? He asked. His voice was barely there, a thread of sound. Yes, she said. How many times? Enough, she said. That's not a number. No, she agreed, it's not. She positioned the needle. I need you to stay very still. I'm not exactly doing backflips over here, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. I need you to tell me if you feel anything sharp, not the needle, different from the needle. How will I know the difference? You'll know, she said. Sergeant Carter was behind her close enough that she could feel his presence holding a light source, a flashlight military issue angled exactly where she needed it without being asked. She registered this as the kind of thing that told you everything about a person. He had understood what she needed before she needed to say it. She inserted the needle. The angle was subxiphoid below the xiphoid process, angled up and to the left toward the left shoulder. 45 degrees. She advanced it slowly, steadily, with the particular quality of concentration that was not tension, but its precise opposite, a stillness that went all the way to the bone. She felt the resistance change. There it was. Aspirating, she said quietly, and pulled back on the plunger, and the syringe filled with dark blood, not bright red, not arterial, but the dark venous blood of the pericardial sac. And she heard Carter let out a long, controlled breath behind her, and she heard Thorne make a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a word, but was somewhere between relief and disbelief. That's it, she said. Stay still. She drew off as much as she safely could, 30 cubic centimeters, 40. She watched his color as she worked. It was a slow change, the way color always changed. When you did this right, not dramatic, not instant, but real. The gray receding, the underlying warmth of a living person coming back to the surface of his skin. His breathing changed, deepened. Oh, he said softly. Oh, that's. Don't move, she said. It's like someone took a boot off my chest, he said. Good, she said. Keep thinking that thought. Don't move while you're thinking it, she finished. Withdrew the needle with the same controlled steadiness with which she had placed it. Pressed a sterile dressing to the site. Her hands were completely steady throughout. Only when she sat back on her heels did she realize that the helicopter had gone entirely quiet. The other Marines, the 5 other men in that aircraft men, with their own wounds, their own pain, had been watching her. All of them, in absolute silence. Carter said holy and then stopped himself. Language, one of the other men said from somewhere behind her, and someone laughed short, exhausted reel. And that laugh broke something open in the air that had been sealed tight for the last 6 minutes. He needs to get inside, Be said standing, already moving toward the door. Real stabilization. He's bought time, not a solution. Move him now. Carter was already waving the orderlies in. She stepped out of the helicopter into the full weight of the April morning, and the light hit her like a physical thing, and she put one hand briefly on the side of the aircraft just for a second, just a grounding touch, and then she was moving to the next chopper. She heard Halloway's voice before she saw him. Galloway? Galloway, stop. She didn't stop. She was already at the door of the second helicopter, already looking in, already reading what was there with the eyes she'd spent years training. Lieutenant Galloway. His voice had shifted, still commanding, still the voice of a man who expected to be obeyed, but underneath it now was something tighter, something that hadn't been there before. She turned around. He was standing 5 feet from her, and he looked like a man who was holding 2 contradictory things in his hands and couldn't figure out how to put either one down. His surgical mask was pulled down around his neck. His clipboard was at his side. You are going to explain to me, he said, measured and deliberate, exactly what you just did in that aircraft. Pericardiocentesis, she said, cardiac tamponade, blood in the pericardial sac, standard needle aspiration. She turned back to the second helicopter. He's stable for now. He needs the OR within the hour. You performed that procedure in a field setting without authorization. He would have been dead in 12 minutes, she said. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking into the second helicopter. 14 at the outside. That is not the sergeant, she said to the Marine in the doorway of the second aircraft. What are we looking at? The sergeant, younger than Carter, with a split lip and blood on his collar, looked between her and Halloway for exactly half a second. Then he looked at her. 3 wounded, 1 critical. GSW to the abdomen, been bleeding for about 40 minutes. 2 others are walking wounded, more or less. More or less, she repeated. Show me the critical. She stepped up into the helicopter. Behind her, she was aware of Halloway standing on the ground, not following, not stopping her, just standing. The abdominal wound was serious but survivable with speed. She assessed, stabilized, called out instructions to the orderlies who had materialized at the door. IV access pressure position. She talked through it the way she always did, not performing, not teaching, just saying what needed to be done in the order it needed to be done. They unloaded that helicopter in 4 minutes. She went to the third. It was on the third helicopter that she found something that stopped her cold for the first time. Not a wound, a face. Sitting against the bulkhead with a field dressing on his right thigh and the particular look of a man who was doing everything in his power not to show how much pain he was in was a Marine she recognized. Older than most of the others, salt and pepper stubble. A scar above his left eyebrow that she knew the history of because she was the one who had stitched it 7 months ago. Staff Sergeant Ronald Briggs. He had been at the fire base last October. He had been one of the 12 she brought back. He looked at her and his face did something complicated. Lieutenant, he said. It's Sergeant Briggs, she said. Your thigh. It's fine, he said. It's bleeding through a field dressing, she said. It's not fine. She was already kneeling beside him. You should have had this addressed 20 minutes ago. I was waiting, he said. For what? He looked at her steadily. For you, he said. And then more quietly, we all were, the whole bird. I told them what you did at Firebase Kilo, told them about the nurse with the limp who came out in the dark with the corpsman and didn't leave until every man was accounted for. He paused. That's why we wouldn't come off the choppers. Angel 6 or nobody. That was unanimous. She kept her hands moving, checking the wound, cutting away the soaked dressing, assessing depth and bleeding. Her face didn't change. That was a significant risk, she said, for the men on these helicopters. I know, he said. We made a calculated decision. Men were bleeding. Men are always bleeding, Briggs said. We needed the right hands. She pressed a fresh dressing to his thigh. He didn't make a sound, though she could see by the set of his jaw what that silence was costing him. You need surgery. This hit the muscle, and there's something in there shrapnel, I think. You think or you know? She felt along the edge of the wound carefully. He held completely still. I know, she said. Then let's get it out. Not here, she said. Or, You'll be there, she paused, just for a fraction of a second. I don't have OR clearance right now, she said. She kept her voice flat, clinical. Briggs looked at her. Then he looked past her toward the door of the helicopter, and she didn't have to look to know who was standing there because she could feel it. The presence of authority exercising itself at the wrong moment. Is that so? Briggs said, and his voice had changed, had gone from the voice of a wounded man to the voice of a man who is very, very calm and very, very dangerous in that calm. I'll make sure you have excellent care, she said. I'm sure you will, Briggs said, because you're going to be in that room. Sergeant. With respect, Lieutenant, Briggs said, and the words were careful, the way words are careful when they are being used precisely. I have been shot, shelled, and airlifted across 40 miles of hostile territory today. I have watched 2 men die on this aircraft. I have held a tourniquet on my own leg for 25 minutes with one hand while helping keep another man's airway open with the other. And I am telling you with full awareness of my situation and my options that I will not go into that operating room without you in it. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has mass. Behind her, she heard Halloway exhale, a slow, compressed sound, the sound of a calculation being revised. She helped Briggs to the door of the helicopter and handed him to 2 orderlies, and she stepped down herself and she turned to face Halloway. He was looking at her in a way she couldn't fully read. Not the cold authority of the ward this morning, not the public dismissal, the finger in her face, the crashing bedpans, something that was being worked out in real time behind his eyes. He won't go in without you, Halloway said. I heard him, she said. You understand this puts me in an impossible position. She looked at him for a moment. Does it? She said. His jaw went tight. I will not have my authority undermined in my own hospital by a major. The voice came from her left, and it was Sergeant Carter from the first helicopter who had no business being out of triage, who should have been inside with Thorne, but who was standing 6 feet away with his bandaged arm at his side and his eyes fixed on Halloway with the focused, patient attention of a man who has made a decision. With respect, sir, every man who came off those birds today, they know what she did. They know what she's always done. And I can tell you right now, from where I'm standing, that if you walk this woman back to a supply shed after what she just did in that helicopter, you're going to have a problem. Not a protocol problem, a people problem. He paused. Sir, Halloway stared at Carter. Carter did not look away. Around them, and this was the thing that Halloway clearly had not accounted for around them, were people. Not just Marines, not just the wounded, hospital staff. Nurses who had come out for the unloading. Orderlies. 2 junior surgeons who had been waiting for direction. All of them watching, all of them very still. Halloway was a man who understood the weight of an audience. He had used it against B this morning in Ward C with the deliberate cruelty of a performance. He understood now that the same physics applied in the other direction. Galloway, he said finally. Major, she said, you will scrub in on the Briggs case. Each word sounded like it cost him something. Under my supervision. Understood, she said. She turned and walked toward the hospital entrance. Her left foot made its slightly uneven rhythm on the ground. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, she heard Carter say something to Halloway too quiet to make out. She heard Halloway's response, which was silence. Inside the hospital, the controlled chaos of mass casualty processing was already in full motion. Gurneys moving. Voices calling out vitals, blood types, surgical priorities. The particular terrible efficiency of people who have done this too many times and have gotten very good at it because they had no other choice. Maria Delgado appeared at B's elbow as she pushed through toward the scrub room. Thorne is stable, Maria said, matching her pace. They've got him in pre-op. His pressure is coming back up. Good to be said. Who's on him? Callahan. Callahan is good. Be said. Make sure he knows about the tamponade history. If there's any change in the pressure reading, I'll tell him, Maria said. She paused. B. They're saying the men from the helicopters, they're saying that you, Maria, B said. Not now. Right. Maria peeled off toward triage. B pushed through into the scrub room. She was 3 minutes into scrubbing when the door opened and Dr. Paul Callahan came in. He was 31, the youngest of the surgical team, with the particular quality of confidence that hadn't yet curdled into arrogance. He was one of the 2 people at this hospital who had never in 8 months treated B like a decoration. Angel 6, he said. She looked at him. Sorry, he said. I heard it so many times in the last 20 minutes it came out automatically. He started scrubbing beside her. Thorne's going to make it. You know that, right? What you did in that helicopter. What's his pressure? 90/60 and coming up. Heart sounds are clear. Rhythm is sinus. Callahan looked at her steadily. You saved that man's life in a Huey with a borrowed flashlight and a 14-gauge needle. It was the right tool for the right problem, she said. B, he said, and his voice was quieter now. Halloway is not going to let this go, you know that. You just made him look like you just showed every person in this compound that he sent the one person they needed to a supply shed. He made a command decision, she said. He made a terrible command decision, and it almost cost lives. That's for someone else to say, she said. Not me, not today. She finished scrubbing. What's the OR rotation? Callahan looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he let it go, the way you let go of something you know you'll pick up again later. Briggs is first. Then we've got 2 more abdominal cases and a chest. He checked his watch. You've got about 4 minutes before they bring him in. She nodded and moved toward the OR. The surgery on Briggs took 67 minutes. She was not the primary surgeon, that was Halloway, and she would not pretend otherwise, not even to herself, but she was there. She called out what she saw when she saw it. She anticipated the next step in the way that good surgical nurses do, the way that separates the people who assist from the people who participate. Twice, Halloway started a maneuver and stopped, and she adjusted her position or the angle of the retractor without being asked. And both times the difficulty resolved. He did not thank her. She did not expect him to. When Briggs was closed and stable, when Halloway had stepped back and stripped off his gloves, with the brisk efficiency of a man moving on to the next thing, and she stood at the table for a moment. Just a moment. Briggs was unconscious. His chest rose and fell with the slow, reliable rhythm of a man who was going to wake up. She put a hand briefly lightly on the side of the table. Not on him, just on the table. Just a small private acknowledgement that this particular fight was over and they had won it. Then she turned and walked out to the next case. It was 2:17 in the afternoon when the last of the helicopter cases came out of surgery. B had been running for nearly 5 hours straight, and her left leg was doing the thing it sometimes did when she pushed it too hard. A deep, low ache that started in the hip and radiated down that she managed by adjusting her gait slightly, by knowing where to put her weight, by the particular stubbornness that she had learned was not separate from her strength, but was its source. She was standing at the nursing station updating charts when Sergeant Carter found her. He had a fresh bandage on his arm, and someone had given him a cup of coffee, which he was holding in both hands, like a man who needed something to hold. He looked less like a soldier right now, and more like a young man who had had a very long day. She thought he was probably 26, 27 maybe. Lieutenant, he said. Sergeant Carter, she said. You should be resting. I know, he said. I wanted to tell you something first. She kept her eyes on the chart. Tell me. And when we were in the air, he said, when the pilot first radioed that we were inbound to the 95th Briggs, got on the radio, and he said we were not going to deplane until he confirmed your status. The pilot thought he was out of his mind. Command was furious. We had a colonel on the frequency telling us it was a direct order to unload immediately. He paused. Briggs told the colonel that with respect, he could go to hell. She looked up from the chart. Carter almost smiled. Word for word, he said. We heard it, all of us, and not one man said anything except, yeah, that's right, because of what Briggs had told us, because of what you did at Firebase Kilo. She was quiet for a moment. That was a dangerous call, Sergeant. Men could have died waiting. Men could have died without you, he said. Thorne for certain. Briggs maybe. The way you moved through those helicopters, the way you didn't miss a single thing." He stopped himself, looked down at his coffee. "I just wanted you to know that we knew what we were asking. We knew the risk, and we made the choice. Every man on those birds made that choice." He looked up. "It wasn't about the limp lieutenant, in case anyone ever tries to tell you different. It wasn't about any of that. It was about you." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her face fast, and then it was gone. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "Now go rest." He nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. "Thorne is awake. He's been asking for you." Oh. She looked at the chart in front of her and at the stack of charts beside it, at the ward beyond the nursing station full of men who needed attention, medication monitoring the thousand small things that kept people alive in the hours after surgery when the body is doing all the hard invisible work of deciding whether to stay or go. "I'll be there in a few minutes," she said. She finished the chart she was on, started the next one, did it correctly, completely with the full attention it deserved, and then she walked down the hall to where Jonathan Thorne was lying in a post-op bed with an IV in his arm and color in his face that hadn't been there 6 hours ago. He was awake, alert. His eyes found her when she came through the door, and they stayed on her. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she said. "How long ago was that?" "Few minutes." "Felt longer," he said. She could hear that he was working to keep his voice light, to perform the casualness that men in his position often performed because the alternative was confronting how close it had actually been. "Is it, am I going to, You're going to be fine," she said. She checked his chart, checked the IV line, checked his pulse at the wrist. "You'll need monitoring for the next 48 hours, and then we'll talk about what comes next." "But I'm going to be fine," he said. "Yes," she said, "you're going to be fine." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father is a senator." She paused, looked at him. "That's so." "Senator William Thorne, Virginia." He watched her face. "I mention it because he's going to find out what happened here today. All of it. He's going to want to know who was responsible for—" Thorne stopped. Something was moving behind his eyes. "I heard what Halloway said to you this morning. Before the helicopters came in, some of the men in Ward C, they told Briggs, and Briggs told us on the bird." He paused. "He put his hands on you." She was very still. "He put his hands on you?" Thorne said again, "and called you a liability and sent you to count bedpans. And then 4 helicopters landed and 30 men refused to move until you came." He held her gaze. "My father is going to find out. And when he does, he's not going to ask questions. He's going to get answers." She looked at the young lieutenant in the bed. 23 years old, pre-med before the war, dark eyes that had been watching her since she climbed into that helicopter. She thought about what to say. She thought about protocol and chain of command and the many reasons why a nurse did not need a senator's intervention, and the many reasons why accepting it could complicate things she had spent years keeping uncomplicated. And then she thought about Ward C this morning, about the bedpans on the floor, about Halloway's finger an inch from her face, about the supply annex and its buzzing light and its boxes of IV bags. She put the chart back in its holder. "Get some rest, Lieutenant Thorne," she said. "Doctor's orders." He looked at her. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, but the shape of one crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked out of the room. Down the hall, past the nursing station, past the orderly, with the supply cart past the door that led to the corridor that led to the rest of the hospital that was still 4 hours after the helicopters landed, running at full capacity with the care of 30 wounded men. She was almost to the main ward when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast. Too fast for a patient. Too deliberate for an orderly. She turned. Halloway was standing 10 feet away. His white coat was gone. He was in scrubs. He looked like a man who had been in 4 consecutive surgeries, which he had, and he also looked like a man who had been thinking about something the entire time he was in those surgeries, which he was fairly certain he had also been doing. He looked at her for a long moment. "Galloway," he said, "Major." He didn't speak for a second. Then he said, "Thorne's father is Senator William Thorne of Virginia." "I'm aware," she said. "He's been notified that his son is here. He's going to be here tomorrow." Halloway's voice was controlled. It was always controlled, but tonight there was something underneath the control that sounded different from anything she had heard there before. "He's going to have questions. I imagine so, she said. Halloway looked at her, really looked at her in a way he hadn't done all day, or possibly ever. Not with authority, not with assessment, not with the particular quality of looking at someone while deciding how they fit into the shape of your priorities. Just looked at her. What you did today, he said, in that helicopter. She waited. It was, he said, and stopped. Started again. The outcome was good. She held very still. The outcome was good. It was possibly the most compressed, most reluctant acknowledgement she had ever received, and it landed somewhere in her chest with a weight she hadn't expected. Thank you, Major, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Down the hall, a monitor beeped. Someone called out a blood pressure reading. The hospital breathed around them with the particular aliveness of a place where the work never stopped. Then Halloway turned and walked away back the way he had come, his footsteps very even and very deliberate on the floor. Bea stood where she was for 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she turned and went back to work. There were still men who needed her. There would always be men who needed her. And the work, as it always had, as it always would, was waiting. She hadn't been scheduled for the night shift. She hadn't been scheduled for anything technically, given that her official assignment, as of 9 o'clock that morning, was still the supply annex. No one had formally reversed that order. No paperwork had changed hands. Halloway had told her to scrub in on Briggs, and she had, and then she had kept working because the work was there and the men needed it, and no one had told her to stop. She was checking on Thorne for the second time that evening when Maria found her at 10:15. He hasn't formally reinstated you, Maria said, keeping her voice low. They were in the corridor outside post-op, and the night staff was thin, 2 nurses for the whole wing, the way it always was after midnight. I checked. Your paperwork still says supply inventory. I know, Bea said. Bea, if something goes wrong, if any of this gets reviewed, then it gets reviewed. Bea said. She looked through the small window in Thorne's door. He was asleep. His color was good. His chest moved with the slow, even rhythm of someone whose heart was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Go get some rest, Maria. You've been on since 6 this morning. So have you, Maria said. Go, Bea said. Maria went, but not without the look, the specific look that said this conversation was not over, only postponed. Bea had been receiving that look from Maria Delgado for 6 of the 8 months she'd been at the 95th, and she had learned to treat it like weather. Noted. Accounted for. No action required. She pushed into Thorne's room and did her check. Vitals, IV site. Dressing over the needle entry point on his chest. Everything exactly as it should be. She was almost to the door when he spoke. You don't sleep, he said. She turned. His eyes were open, only barely, the heavy-lidded look of someone surfacing from sedation rather than natural sleep. I sleep, she said. When there's time. She came back to the side of the bed, checked his pulse again because it gave her something to do with her hands while he looked at her with those 2 aware eyes. How's your pain level managed, he said. They gave me something earlier. I know, it's going to wear off around 0300, tell the night nurse. I'll tell you, he said. I won't be here at 0300. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my father is coming at 0900. You mentioned. I want you to be here, he said. When he comes, she looked at him. Lieutenant Thorne. Jonathan, he said. Lieutenant? She said firmly but not unkindly. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but your father's visit and whatever comes from it, that's not something I need you to manage for me. I'm not trying to manage anything, he said. I'm trying to make sure the right person is in the room. He held her gaze with the focused clarity of a man who was tired but not confused. You know what happened this morning. You know what he did to you in that ward. You know what he called you. His voice dropped. You know that without you, I'm not in this bed right now. I'm not anywhere. She was quiet for a moment. Get some rest, she said. That's what you can do for me right now. She left before he could say anything else. The hallway was quiet. Her footsteps made their uneven rhythm on the floor, and the hospital breathed around her, the soft, persistent sounds of machines monitoring the fragile, stubborn fact of 30 men still being alive. And she walked to the end of the corridor and stood at the window for exactly 1 minute. 1 minute was all she allowed herself. It was a discipline she had developed over years, the same way you develop any tool out of necessity, refined by use. 1 minute to feel whatever needed to be felt. Then back to work. The window was dark. In the distance, the war went on. She felt in that 1 minute the full weight of the day. Not the fear, she had processed the fear in real time, as she always did, converting it into focus, into the precision that fear, properly managed, could become. What she felt now was something slower and deeper. The particular exhaustion of a person who has spent an entire day proving something they should never have had to prove. The minute ended. She turned around and went back to work. At 0600 the next morning, she was at the nursing station updating the overnight charts when Kowalski appeared. He was in his supply inventory uniform, a cup of terrible coffee in each hand, and he held one out to her with the solemnity of a man offering a sacrament. "Heard you were still here," he said. "News travels," she said. She took the coffee. "The whole hospital knows," he said. He sat down on the edge of the desk in the way young men sit when they want to convey casual support without committing to a specific posture. "The Marines have been talking. The day staff is going to come in knowing everything that happened yesterday." "Good," she said. He blinked. "Good. The truth is useful," she said. "People should have it." She took a sip of the coffee. It was as always terrible. She drank it anyway. "How are the supplies?" He stared at her. "Are you seriously asking me about the supplies?" "Someone has to." "B," he said, and it was the first time he had ever used her first name, and he seemed to realize it immediately because his ears went slightly red. "Lieutenant, the entire nursing staff is waiting to see what Halloway does. After what happened yesterday, after what he did in that ward, people are angry. Really angry, not just the nurses, the orderlies. Callahan, the junior surgeons." He paused. "There's a thing happening." "What kind of thing?" she said. "A quiet thing," he said. "The kind of thing where nobody has said anything officially, but everybody knows." She looked at him. "Kowalski, stay out of it." "I'm already in it," he said. "We're all in it. You just haven't been looking." She had been looking. She had been looking at everything she always did, but she had made a decision years ago about the kinds of battles worth fighting and the kinds of battles worth waiting out. She picked up her charts and kept working. At 0730, Halloway walked in. He was in a clean uniform, pressed the silver at his temples, catching the morning light in the way it always did, projecting the authority he wore like a second skin. He moved through the nursing station with the brisk certainty of a man who owned the space, and Bea watched him from the corner of her eye without looking up from her chart. He stopped at the nursing station, looked at the overnight notices, looked at the chart she was currently updating, specifically at the handwriting on it, which was hers. "Galloway," he said. "Major," she said without looking up. "You were here overnight." "Yes." "You're not scheduled for overnight." "No," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him pick up another chart, flip through it, set it down. "Thorne's vitals look good," he said. "They do," she said. "Your assessment." She did look up then, because the question was genuine. She could hear it underneath the performance of authority, the actual question of a doctor wanting information. She had learned to hear that note in him. It was one of the few things she respected about him even now. "He'll need monitoring for another 36 hours minimum," she said. "The tamponade resolved cleanly, but I want to see 3 consecutive stable readings before I'm comfortable reducing the check frequency. His pressure is responding well. Heart sounds remain clear." She paused. "He's young, that's in his favor." Halloway listened to all of this, nodded once. "I'll review him at 0800. "He has a visitor expected at 0900, she said, the smallest pause. "I'm aware," Halloway said. He walked away down the corridor. She watched him go. There was something different in his posture this morning. Still straight, still deliberate, still every inch the chief of surgery, but carrying something additional. A weight that hadn't been there yesterday morning when he had stood over her in Ward C and pointed his finger and said the words that still sat in her chest like stones. The weight of a man who knows that something has shifted and cannot yet calculate exactly what the shift is going to cost him. She went back to her chart. She finished it. She started the next one. At 0855, she heard the car. She wasn't near a window. She didn't need to be. She heard the sound of it through the walls, a vehicle pulling into the compound with the specific authority of official transportation doors, opening voices outside. She heard the change in the energy of the hospital, the way you hear a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. The staff moving differently, quicker, more alert. She was in Thorne's room checking his morning vitals when the door opened. Senator William Thorne was 61 years old, and he was the kind of man who walked into rooms the way weather systems do, not announcing himself exactly but impossible to ignore. He was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, with the specific quality of stillness that powerful men develop when they have learned that stillness is more effective than motion. He was followed by an aide who was trying to keep up and a Colonel Fulbert Army who was not trying to keep up because he was already where he needed to be. The senator's eyes went to his son first. Just for a moment, a raw, unguarded moment that B deliberately did not look at directly because some things between fathers and sons are private, even in hospital rooms, and then they moved to her. "You're the nurse," he said. "Lieutenant Beatrice Galloway," she said. "Yes, sir." He looked at her the way men like him look at people, not dismissively, not aggressively, but with the focused attention of someone taking an inventory. Then he crossed the room and held out his hand. She shook it. "My son tells me," the senator said, "that you saved his life in a helicopter." "I performed a necessary procedure," she said. "The credit belongs to the corpsman who kept him stable long enough to reach us." "Dad," Thorne said from the bed, "she's being modest. She diagnosed cardiac tamponade from the doorway of a Huey and drained the pericardial sac with a borrowed flashlight and a needle." "Jonathan," she said. "No," he said, and his voice had the quiet firmness of someone who had decided somewhere in the long hours of the previous night that he was done being polite about this particular thing. "No, you spent yesterday saving 30 men's lives and then went back to update their charts at midnight, and the man who put you in a supply shed is currently walking around this hospital like he runs it, which he does, but not because he deserves to." The room was very quiet. The senator had not taken his eyes off B. "Is that accurate?" he said. "The supply shed." She held very still. "There was a command decision made regarding my assignment," she said carefully, "based on concerns about my physical fitness for duty." "Your physical fitness," the senator repeated. He said it the way you repeat something when you are making sure you have heard it correctly and want the person who said it to hear it themselves. "Yes, sir." "Because of your leg?" "Yes, sir." The senator looked at his son. Thorne looked back at him with the expression of a man who has said his piece and is now waiting for the world to catch up. Then the senator turned to the colonel beside him. The colonel, his name was Reeves, she could see from the name tape, had the look of a man who had been briefed on this situation and was waiting to see which direction the senator intended to take it. "I want the commanding officer of this facility," the senator said. "I want him in this room now." Reeves was already at the door. B said, "Senator Thorne, Lieutenant Galloway," the senator said, turning back to her, and his voice was not angry, that was the thing. It was not angry, it was something more precise than anger. "I have been in politics for 22 years. I have sat on the Armed Services Committee for 11 of those years. I have voted on funding for every military medical facility in this theater of operation." He paused. "And I am telling you that what you have just described to me, what my son has described to me, is something I intend to address, not as a father, as a senator." He looked at her steadily. "Do you understand the difference?" She understood the difference. "Yes, sir," she said. "Good," he said. Halloway arrived 4 minutes later. She had been counting. He came through the door with the controlled composure of a man who has had 4 minutes to prepare and has used them well. His posture was correct. His expression was professional. He was carrying, she noticed, absolutely nothing, no clipboard, no chart, no prop of authority. He had come with only himself, and she could see that this was a deliberate choice, the same way everything Halloway did was deliberate. "Senator Thorne," he said, "I'm Major Richard Halloway, Chief of Surgery. I'm very glad to see your son doing well." "Are you?" the senator said. "The 95th Evacuation Hospital maintains the highest standard of a Major Halloway," the senator said. And the way he said it, quiet, conversational, with the pleasant firmness of a man who is entirely comfortable with confrontation, stopped Halloway mid-sentence. "I'd like to talk about Lieutenant Galloway." Something moved across Halloway's face, very fast. Then it was gone. "Of course," he said. "Yesterday morning," and the senator said, "you removed her from active nursing duty and assigned her to supply inventory based on a physical assessment of her mobility. I made a command decision based on—" "You grabbed her," Thorne said from the bed. His voice was clear and flat. "In front of the ward, you put your hands on her and shoved her into a supply cart." The room held its breath. Halloway's jaw went rigid. That is not an accurate representation of Corporal Hayes, Thorne said. Ward C, he told Briggs. Briggs told us in Italy in the helicopter. Do you want me to describe exactly what Corporal Hayes said, Major? Because I have it memorized, word for word. Halloway looked at B. And for the first time since she had known him, for the first time in 8 months of being dismissed and talked over and worked around and finally shoved into a supply cart, she saw something in his eyes that was not authority, not calculation, not the performance of control. It was fear. Not the fear of a man who is about to be physically harmed. The fear of a man who has possibly for the first time looked at what he has done and seen it from outside himself. She did not feel satisfaction. She had expected to, and she did not. What she felt was something sadder and more complicated than satisfaction, the feeling of seeing a person recognize their own capacity for cruelty and not know what to do with the recognition. Major Halloway, the senator said, I'm going to be very clear with you. I'm not here to ruin your career. I'm here because my son is alive, and the reason my son is alive is standing in this room, and as of yesterday morning, that person was counting bedpans. He paused. I want that corrected. Today, in writing, I want Lieutenant Galloway reinstated to full active nursing duty with all associated responsibilities. And I want the record of yesterday's reassignment amended to reflect that it was made in error. The aide in the corner was writing something down. B noticed this. Halloway said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at a point somewhere between the senator and the wall, and she could see the calculation happening, the same calculation she had watched happen on his face 100 times, the weighing of outcomes, the measuring of costs. Lieutenant Galloway, he said finally. He turned to look at her directly. Is reinstatement to active duty your wish? She looked at him. She took her time. Yes, she said, it is. He nodded once. The nod of a man making a formal commitment, not a personal one. I'll have the paperwork processed within the hour. Thank you, Major, the senator said. Halloway looked at B for one more moment. She held his gaze steadily, the way she always did, the way she had always done, not challenging, not triumphant, just present, just there. Then he turned and walked out of the room. The senator let out a slow breath. His son in the bed closed his eyes briefly and then opened them again. Lieutenant Galloway, the senator said. Then, Sir, she said, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly. He looked at her with the particular directness of a man accustomed to being lied to by professionals. Is there anything else that needs to be addressed? Any pattern of treatment that goes beyond what happened yesterday? She thought about it. She genuinely thought about it, not the quick dismissal she sometimes offered, not the careful deflection, but the real answer. There is a broader problem, she said, not specific to me. Nurses in field hospitals in this hospital are consistently excluded from surgical decisions they have the training and the observation to contribute to. We are managed, not consulted. We identify things, we flag things. And the system is built to route those flags away from the people making decisions. She paused. What happened to me yesterday was personal. What I'm describing is structural. She held his gaze. That's harder to fix with paperwork. The senator was quiet for a moment. Colonel Reeves had stopped writing. No, the senator said slowly, it is not. He looked at his son again, at the IV in his arm, and the dressing on his chest, and the color in his face that B had put there with his 14-gauge needle and 37 years of accumulated stubbornness. But it's worth trying. She looked at the senator. She looked at Thorne. Yes, she said, it is. At 10:40, Kowalski found her in the corridor. He was practically vibrating. Word just came through the nursing station, he said. Your reinstatement paperwork is being processed. Halloway signed it himself. I know, she said. Callahan is telling everyone, he said. He's not being subtle about it. Callahan has never been subtle about anything, she said. The Marines in Ward D are, he stopped, started again. Okay, so when the word got to Sergeant Briggs, he apparently, and I'm quoting here, he apparently sat straight up in his bed, which his surgeon had specifically told him not to do, and said something I cannot repeat in polite company. And then he laughed so hard they thought he'd torn a stitch. She stopped walking. A smile crossed her face, real unguarded for just a moment. She let it. Go make sure he hasn't actually torn a stitch, she said. Kowalski grinned and turned to go. Then he turned back. For what it's worth, he said. From day one, from the very first day you were here, I thought he was wrong about you. I just want you to know that. She looked at the young man from Milwaukee who fainted at a certain volume of blood and had handed her a pencil that morning so she could count IV bags. "I know," she said. "Thank you, Arlen." He blinked. She had never used his first name before. Then she turned and walked down the hall, and her left foot made its slightly uneven rhythm on the floor. And every person she passed, the nurses, the orderlies, the junior surgeon, who nodded at her from the doorway of the supply room. Even the corporal from Ward C, who should not have been out of bed, but was standing in the hall anyway, and stood a little straighter when she passed, every one of them saw her. Not the limp, not the reassignment, not the bedpans on the floor of Ward C, or the supply shed with its buzzing light. Her. At 11:03, she picked up her first official chart of her reinstated active duty. It was Private Danny Ruiz in Ward C, the same man she had been treating when Halloway found her yesterday morning. His fever had broken overnight. His numbers were improving. She updated his chart with the same careful, methodical attention she brought to everything. Then she moved to the next patient, and the next. And the next, the work was waiting. The work was always waiting. And now finally officially on paper, and in fact she was back where she had always belonged. But something had changed. She could feel it in the way the ward moved around her, the subtle, unmistakable shift of a space that has reorganized itself around a new center of gravity. The nurses deferred to her differently. The orderlies asked her questions they hadn't asked before. Callahan stopped in the doorway of Ward C and gave her a look that communicated without a single word everything. She was still a lieutenant. She was still a nurse with a limp in a war zone in April 1969. Nothing about the system that had put her in a supply shed had been fundamentally dismantled. One senator's visit, one signed piece of paperwork, she was not naive about what that could and could not change. But 30 men were alive, and they knew her name. And that she let herself feel it standing in Ward C, with Danny Ruiz's chart in her hands and the heat pressing down on everything outside that was real. That was as real as anything got. She was still working at 1400 when Sergeant Carter appeared in the doorway of the ward. His arm was in a sling now properly set and wrapped. He looked rested, or as rested as a man could look 20 hours after coming off a combat helicopter. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her. "Heard the news," he said. "Word travels fast," she said. "It does when people are paying attention." He came a few steps into the ward. "I also heard that Senator Thorne had a conversation with the major this morning." "Senator Thorne visited his son," she said. Carter almost smiled. "Right," he said. "That's what happened." She set down her chart. She looked at Carter at his bandaged arm, his steady eyes, the way he stood like a man who had something to say and was deciding how to say it. "Sergeant," she said, "yesterday on the helicopter, you held that light exactly where I needed it without being asked." He looked at her. "That matters," she said, "more than you might think. In that kind of work, the difference between the right angle and the wrong one." She paused. "I just want you to know that I noticed." Carter was quiet for a moment. The ward moved around them. "Angel 6, he said quietly. "Don't," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you don't like it. But I want you to understand something." He met her eyes and held them. "That name, what it means to the men who were on those birds yesterday, it's not about the miracle. It's not about the needle or the diagnosis or the medical thing you did." He paused. "It's about the fact that you came when we called you came. And nobody who was on those helicopters is ever going to forget that." The ward was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped its steady, patient rhythm. Bee picked up her chart. "I know," she said, and she went back to work. 3 days after the helicopters landed, the official inquiry began. Bee found out the way she found out most things at the 95th, not from a memo, not from a briefing, but from Kowalski, who had overheard something in the supply corridor that he wasn't supposed to hear, and had the particular gift of a young man who understood exactly when information needed to travel fast. "There's an investigative review being opened," he told her at 06:45 in the narrow hallway outside Ward C. His voice was low. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he was genuinely unsettled, a slight rapid blinking that he was completely unaware of. "Colonel Reeves filed the paperwork yesterday afternoon. It's a formal review of command decisions during the April 14th mass casualty event." Bee looked at him. "That covers the entire event," she said. "Boss." "Yes," he said, "all of it, including the initial triage assignments, including the delay in deploying personnel." He paused. including the reassignment of a nursing officer immediately prior to the event. She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the morning shift was beginning footsteps, voices, the changing of the guard between the people who had been awake all night and the people who were just arriving to take their place. The hospital's particular rhythm, she had learned to read it the way sailors read water. "When does it start?" she said. "Today," Kowalski said. 0900. "They've already asked for your personnel file." She took a breath. "Thank you, Arlen." "B." He stopped her before she could move. "Halloway knows. He's been in his office since 0600. Callahan walked past the door and said he could hear him on the phone. She processed this, filed it. "Go do your job," she said. "Don't get involved in things that don't concern you." "Everything that happens to you concerns me," he said, and then immediately looked like he wished he hadn't said it quite that directly, and turned and walked away very quickly in the direction of the supply annex. She stood in the hallway for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went to check on her patients. Thorne was awake when she came in at 0700. He was more alert than he had been the day before the sedation fully cleared. The pain managed to a level that allowed him to think cleanly, and he was sitting up at an angle that was better for his breathing, which she had suggested the previous afternoon and the night nurse had maintained. He had a notepad on his knee. He had been writing something. He closed the notepad when she came in. "How are you feeling?" she said. "Better," he said. "Clearer." He watched her move through the room with the efficient, unhurried attention she brought to everything. "I heard about the review." She didn't look up from his chart. "Who told you?" "Carter came by last night," he said. "He has sources." "Carter should be resting." "Carter," Thorne said, "does not appear to rest. I'm not sure he's physically capable of it." He paused. "I'm going to be asked to give a statement." "I know," she said. "I'm going to tell them exactly what happened," he said. "All of it. What I heard from the Ward C men about the morning, what happened on the helicopter, what I saw in the 3 days since." He held her gaze steadily. "I want you to know that in advance, in case you were going to ask me to be careful." She looked at him. "Were you expecting me to ask you that?" "I wasn't sure," he said. "You're careful about everything. The way you talk about Halloway, even when he's wrong, even when he's been cruel, you're careful. You find the most neutral possible framing." He watched her. "I've been trying to figure out if that's discipline or habit." She set the chart down. She looked at this young man pre-med before the war, dark eyes, a scar from the dressing on his chest that he would carry for the rest of his life, and she decided to give him a real answer. "Both," she said. "When you spend enough time in a system that can hurt you for speaking directly, you develop the habit of indirection. And then the discipline takes over the habit because discipline is at least something you choose." She picked up the chart again. "But I've never asked anyone to lie for me. I'm not starting now." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. Then after a pause, "My father called last night." "How is he I'm determined," Thorne said. He almost smiled, which is his natural state. "He's been on the phone with someone at Army Medical Command." He paused. "B. They're looking at more than just the April 14th event. My father pushed for a broader scope. The review is going to cover the last 6 months of command decisions at this hospital." The chart in her hands felt suddenly very still, the way objects feel still when the person holding them has stopped moving. 6 months. The full breadth of her time at the 95th. Every flag she had raised. Every case she had been excluded from. Every quiet night she had spent doing work that was not hers to do because no one else was doing it and the patient still needed it done. "That's a significant scope," she said carefully. "Yes," Thorne said. "It is." She finished her notes on his chart. She replaced it in its holder. She did everything exactly the way she would have done it on any other morning, with the same attention, the same precision, the same absolute refusal to let the size of what was happening outside this room change the quality of what she owed the person inside it. "Your heart sounds are clear," she said. "Pressure is stable. I want you to try walking today, short distances with support, no heroics." "Understood," he said. "I mean it about the heroics," she said. "You have a fresh pericardial site. I will know if you overdo it." "How will you know?" "Because I always know," she said, and she walked out. The corridor outside post-op was different that morning. She could feel it before she could see it, a quality of attention in the people she passed, a particular charge in the air of a place where something is about to happen and everyone knows it and no one is saying it out loud. Junior nurses who would normally have moved past her without eye contact held it now briefly with the complicated look of people who are on a side and are only now realizing they are on a side. Two orderlies stopped talking when she rounded the corner and then started again slightly too loudly about something entirely unrelated. She walked through all of it the same way she walked through everything. Steady, present, uneven left foot and all. At 08:30, Halloway found her. She was in the medication room checking a dosage discrepancy she had found in the overnight log. Someone had recorded a morphine administration at 0200 that didn't match the supply count, which could mean a recording error or could mean something more serious, and she intended to find out which. She was in the middle of the count when the door opened. Halloway stood in the doorway. He looked like he had not slept. Not dramatically, not the wild-eyed, disheveled look of a man coming apart, but the subtle, expensive-looking fatigue of someone who had managed their sleeplessness carefully and was now paying the tax on that management. His uniform was pressed. His posture was correct. But something behind his eyes was different from any version of him she had seen before. "I need to speak with you," he said. "I'm in the middle of a count," she said. "When you're done," he said. He didn't leave. He stood in the doorway. She finished the count. The discrepancy was a recording error. The nurse had written 0200 when she meant 020, a transposition easily identified when you check the secondary log. She noted it, corrected it, signed her initials. Then she turned to face him. "Major," she said. He came into the room and closed the door behind him. This was notable because Halloway never closed doors. He was a man who preferred open doors, the implicit audience, the visible chain of command, extending in both directions. Closed doors meant something. He stood for a moment with his hands at his sides, and she watched him do the thing she had watched him do 100 times: the internal preparation, the gathering of the performance of himself that he wore into every room. Except this time something was different. He looked at her and he said, "I owe you an apology." The medication room was very quiet. She waited. She had spent her entire career learning that the most important thing you could do when someone was saying something real was to stay completely still and let them say it. "What I did in Ward's cell," he said, "the physical contact, it was wrong. It was unprofessional and it was wrong." He held her gaze. Each word sounded like it was being extracted from somewhere very deep at some cost she couldn't fully calculate. "I have spent the last 3 days telling myself that my concerns about your mobility were legitimate, that my command decision was defensible, that the manner in which I carried it out was—" He stopped. "I was wrong about the decision, about the manner, about all of it." She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had used every instrument of authority available to him to reduce her publicly in front of people she worked with and patients she cared for, who had grabbed her arm and shoved her and stood over her and called her a liability, who had sent her to a supply shed 4 hours before 30 Marines arrived, needing exactly what she could provide. She thought about what to say. She thought about the many things she could say, the many true and legitimate things that lived in the space between what he had done and what he was now offering. "Thank you," she said, "for saying that." He nodded once, the same way he had nodded when he signed the reinstatement paperwork formally conclusively, as though a contract had been executed. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "The review," he said, "I know what it's going to find. The pattern, the cases you flagged that weren't acted on, the surgical exclusions, the assignment practices. I know what the record shows." He paused. "I want you to know that I won't obstruct it." She looked at him carefully. "Is that a decision you've made, or a decision that's been made for you?" Something moved across his face, a flicker of something that might in another man have been respect. "Both," he said, and then he was quiet for a moment, and he said something else that she had not expected and would remember for a long time. "I am a good surgeon," he said. "I want you to know that I know that. What I did to you does not change that, and it doesn't explain it, and I'm not offering it as a justification. But I want you to understand that the decision I made about you the morning of the 14th, it wasn't about your competence." He held her gaze. "It was about mine." She said nothing. "If you're the best person in the room," he said quietly, "and the room can see it, then I have to live with being the second best person in the room." He paused. I didn't want to live with that. The medication room held the confession the way a room holds sound after someone has said the thing that changes the shape of everything. She looked at Halloway at this man who had for 8 months been the primary obstacle between her and the work she was built for, and who was now standing in a closed room telling her the truth about why, and she felt something shift in her understanding of him. Not forgiveness, not absolution. She was not in the business of those things this morning, but something more complicated and more honest than the clean narrative of villain and victim she had been living inside. "You should go," she said. "The review starts in 20 minutes. He straightened. "Yes," he said. He moved to the door. He opened it, and then he stopped with his hand on the door, not turning around, and he said, "Angel 6. She looked at his back. "The Marines who came up with that," he said. "They weren't wrong." He walked out. She stood in the medication room for 30 seconds after he left. Then she went to check on Briggs. Briggs was in Ward D, 3 beds from the window, sitting up with the particular bearing of a man whose body was mending faster than anyone had a right to expect, and who was making absolutely no effort to slow down. His leg was elevated. There was a book in his lap, a battered paperback with a broken spine that he was not reading. He was watching the door when she came in. "Heard Halloway went to find you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Word travels," she said. "Carter has sources everywhere," Briggs said unapologetically. "What did he say?" "That's between the Major and me," she said. She checked his chart. "How's the leg?" "It doesn't hurt," he said. "It should hurt," she said. "If it doesn't hurt, something is wrong. You should not be numb." "It hurts a little," he amended. "I was being stoic." "Stop being stoic and tell me accurately," she said. "It hurts like someone put a hot coal in my thigh and then covered it with a sheet and told me to ignore it," he said. "Better?" "Better," she said. She checked the wound. Clean healing, well approximated. Callahan had done good work. She had done good work alongside him. "You're progressing well. If the next 48 hours look like the last 48, we can start talking about limited mobility." "How limited?" he said. "Very," she said. "Don't negotiate with me, Sergeant." He almost smiled. "I learned not to negotiate with you at Firebase Kilo," he said. "You told me then that I'd be fine. I didn't believe you because I'd been awake for 31 hours and I was fairly convinced I was dying. You were right." "You weren't dying," she said. "I know that now," he said. "I didn't know it then." He looked at her steadily. "B, the review. What happens to you after?" She set his chart down. She looked at him, at this man who had told a colonel to go to hell at 40 miles an hour in a damaged helicopter because he had made a decision about which hands he trusted, about which person in the entire theater of this war was worth waiting for. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's not something I can control." "Can you control anything?" he said. "About what comes next?" "I can do my job," she said. "I can do it right. I can make sure the men in this hospital get what they need while I'm here." She paused. "That's always been the answer. For me, that's always been the thing." Briggs was quiet for a moment. "What if it's not enough?" he said. "What if you do everything right and the system still—" "Then the system is wrong," she said simply. "And that's the system's problem, not mine." She picked up his chart and made her notes. "You can be angry about the injustice of a system and still refuse to let it define what you do inside it. Those two things aren't contradictory." She set the chart back. "Now rest. The limited mobility conversation happens in 48 hours and not a minute sooner." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he said it the way Thorne had said it, not in compliance, but in something deeper and more genuine than compliance. "The way you speak to someone you mean." The review convened at 0900 in the hospital's administrative conference room. B was not in it. She was in Ward C doing rounds, which was where she was supposed to be, which was exactly where she intended to stay. She was there when the first thing happened. At 10:22, Maria appeared at the ward entrance with a look on her face that B had come to recognize as the specific look of someone carrying news that was large and needed to be delivered carefully. "What?" B said. "Halloway," Maria said. She came all the way into the ward and lowered her voice even though the nearest patient was asleep. "He just submitted a voluntary statement to the review panel. Before they called him, he walked in, gave it to Reeves, and walked back out." B set down her chart. "What kind of statement?" "Full accounting," Maria said. "That's what Callahan heard. He was in the hallway when Reeves came out and said something to his aide." full voluntary accounting of command decisions and the rationale behind them. Maria held her gaze. B. He included April 14th, all of it, including what he did in Ward C. The ward breathed around them, a monitor beeped. Someone shifted in a bed. He said he would. B said quietly, "You knew." "He told me this morning," she said. Maria stared at her. "And you didn't—" She stopped, started again. "How are you this calm?" "I'm not calm," B said. She picked up her chart. "I'm working. There's a difference." It was at 11:07 that the second thing happened. Carter found her. He was not supposed to be out of his assigned ward. His arm was in a sling and he had a follow-up dressing change scheduled for noon, but Carter, she had come to understand, treated his own medical restrictions with the same flexible interpretation he apparently brought to most regulations. He was carrying something. A folded piece of paper which he held out to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This came through the communications office," he said. "For you." She looked at the paper in his hand. "What is it?" "Read it," he said. She took it, unfolded it. It was a transcription of a radio communication timestamped 3 days ago, the day of the mass casualty event, 0936, before the helicopters had even landed. The communication was from a Marine corpsman at a forward operating base 14 miles north of Da Nang. His name was listed as Corporal Thomas Webb, 3rd Marine Battalion, and what he had said in the middle of a combat situation with the helicopters already loaded and already moving, was this: "Get them to the 95th. Tell them Angel 6 is there. Tell them she's there and she'll come. The men need to know she'll come." She read it twice. The paper was slightly warm from Carter's hand. "Webb was at Firebase Kilo," Carter said quietly. "Last October. He was one of the 12. She folded the paper. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in her breast pocket, pressed flat against her chest. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was completely even. "B," he said, and he hadn't called her that before, and she let it go. That message went out before we were even in the air. The decision to wait, to refuse to unload without you, it started 14 miles away, 3 hours before we landed." He paused. "You didn't just earn that trust in the helicopter. You earned it 6 months ago in the dark with a field kit and 31 Marines who were out of options." He held her gaze. "I just want you to understand what you are to these men, what Angel 6 actually means." She looked at him, at the bandaged arm, at the steady, serious face of a man who had held a flashlight exactly where it needed to be without being asked. "I understand," she said. "Do you?" he said. She thought about it, really thought about it. About the supply annex and the IV bags and the one buzzing light. About the needle in the helicopter and Thorne's color coming back. About Briggs sitting up in Ward D telling her the truth about his pain. About the folded paper now against her heart with its message sent 14 miles out, 3 hours before the helicopters landed. "I'm starting to," she said. At 1400, Colonel Reeves came to find her in the nursing station. He was alone, no aid, no documentation, no clipboard. He stood in front of her with the careful posture of a man delivering something significant and wanting to do it correctly. "Lieutenant Galloway," he said. "Colonel Reeves," she said. "The review panel has completed its initial assessment," he said. "I want you to know that formally. And I want to tell you informally that the findings are going to be significant." He paused. "Major Halloway's command authority over nursing staff assignments is being suspended pending the full review. Effective this afternoon." She was very still. "Effective this afternoon," she repeated. "Yes?" Reeves looked at her steadily. "Additionally, the panel is recommending a structural review of nursing integration and surgical decision-making across this and 2 other facilities in the region. Senator Thorne has indicated that he intends to push for a broader congressional review of nursing authority protocols in field hospitals." She set down the chart she was holding. She did it carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to drop. "That's larger than I expected," she said. "It's larger than anyone expected," Reeves said. He held her gaze. "This started with one nurse and one command decision on one morning. It has become something considerably bigger than that." He paused. "I want to ask you directly, is there anything you need, anything within my authority to provide that would support your continued work at this facility?" She thought about it. "Ward C needs a second senior nurse on the night shift," she said. "The current staffing level means things get missed. Danny Ruiz almost went septic 2 nights ago because one nurse was covering 34 patients. Reeves blinked. He had clearly been expecting a different kind of answer. Yes, I'll see what can be done. And the supply annex inventory is a mess, she said. Kowalski has been managing it alone. He needs support. There are expired surgical supplies in there that nobody has flagged because nobody with authority has been paying attention to the inventory process. Noted, Reeves said. Those are my requests, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Not a single one of those is about you, he said. Moo-oh, she agreed. It's not. Reeves made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the vicinity of one. Lieutenant Galloway, he said, you are a remarkable person. I'm a nurse, she said. Can I get back to work? He stepped back. Of course, he said. She picked up her chart. She went back to work. At 16:30, she was in the corridor outside post-op when she heard footsteps behind her that she recognized before she turned around. The particular cadence of them, slightly heavy on the right, controlled deliberate, was Halloway's, and she braced herself without meaning to the reflex of 8 months. But when she turned, his face was different from anything she had prepared for. He was holding a chart. Her chart. Her personnel file, the physical copy, the one that had been pulled for the review. He held it out to her. This belongs to you, he said. She looked at it. That should go back to administration, she said. I know, he said. I'm taking it there now. I wanted you to see it first. He held it open to the last page. There was a new entry in his handwriting dated that day. She read it. It said, Lieutenant Galloway's reassignment on April 14th, 1969, was made in error and did not reflect an accurate assessment of her capabilities, her record, or her value to this facility and its patients. The error was mine. The record should reflect that. She read it twice. She looked at his face. Richard Halloway, she said. She used his name, his actual name, not his rank without planning to. It came out in the quiet voice she used when something mattered. His jaw worked. He closed the file. I'll take it to administration, he said. He turned and walked away down the hall. She stood where she was. The corridor moved around her nurses, orderlies, the ongoing, relentless life of a hospital doing its work. She stood in the middle of all of it, and she felt for just a moment the full weight and the full lightness of everything that had happened in the last 72 hours. Then she straightened. She adjusted the chart under her arm, and she went to check on her patients because they were still there, because they still needed her, and because the work, her real work, the work that no one had ever been able to take from her, no matter what they sent her to count in a supply shed, was waiting. It was always waiting, and she was always going to answer. 5 days after the helicopters landed, the hospital felt different. Not quiet, or a field hospital in Da Nang in April 1969 was never quiet. Not with the war pressing in from every direction, not with the constant arrival of new casualties, not with the machinery of survival running at full capacity around the clock. But there was a different quality to the noise now, a different temperature in the air between people. The kind of shift that happens in a place when something that was true for a long time has been named out loud, and the naming of it has changed what it is possible to pretend. Bea felt it every morning when she walked through the main ward. She felt it in the way the junior nurses stood a little straighter when she was near. Not in deference, but in something closer to alignment, the unconscious posture of people who have found a direction they trust and are orienting themselves toward it. She felt it in the way the orderlies brought her information without being asked. The way corpsmen stopped her in corridors to tell her things they had previously only told surgeons. She felt it in the particular silence that fell over any room. Halloway entered a silence that had changed in quality. No longer the silence of people waiting to see which way authority would move, but the silence of people who had already made their own assessment. She was aware of all of it. She did not let herself be distracted by it. At 06:50 on the 5th morning, she was in Ward C, completing her first round when Callahan fell into step beside her, with the particular energy of a man who has been awake too long and has compensated for it with coffee and the specific stimulation of important news. Senate Armed Services Committee, he said without preamble. She checked the chart in her hand. What about it? Senator Thorne made a statement yesterday evening. Washington time. Callahan kept his voice low, though the ward was mostly asleep. He named the 95th by name. He named the structural failures. He named the incident. He paused. He named you. She stopped walking. She looked at Callahan. By name, she said. Lieutenant Beatrice Galloway, Callahan confirmed. Angel 6, in a formal Senate statement. He watched her face. It's going to be in the papers. Already is probably given the time difference. She stood with Danny Ruiz's chart in her hands. Danny, whose fever she had caught on the morning of the 14th, who was now sleeping peacefully 3 beds down, with numbers that were clean and improving. She looked at him. She thought about what it meant for her name to be in a Senate statement, what it meant for all of it, the supply annex, the bedpans on the floor, the 14-gauge needle in a helicopter to have traveled that far. How's Thorne? She said. Callahan blinked. I just told you that you're in a Senate statement and you're asking me about, how is he? She said. He's good, Callahan said, slightly deflated. Pressure's been stable for 36 hours. Heart sounds are completely clear. I think we can start talking about discharge planning in the next day or two. Good, she said. She moved to the next patient. Callahan watched her for a moment. You're not going to say anything about the statement. What would I say? She said. I don't know. Something. Most people, when their name goes into a Senate statement, most people haven't spent the last 5 days running a ward that was chronically understaffed while an investigative review sorted out who was responsible for it being chronically understaffed. She said. She said it without heat as a simple statement of fact. I have work to do, Paul. So do you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and he turned and he went to do his work. She went to do hers. At 08:15, Maria found her at the nursing station with the look. The specific look, elevated to a degree we had not seen before. Kowalski's phone is ringing off the hook, Maria said. The communications office has had 3 calls from Washington since 0700. 2 journalists, one from the Washington Post, have made inquiries at the front gate. She set her hands flat on the desk. B. This is bigger than we thought it was going to be. I know, B said. The Post, Maria said. Washington. I can hear you, B said. Are you going to talk to them? B set down her pen. She looked at Maria, at this woman who had come to find her in the supply annex 5 days ago and told her the helicopters were coming, who had broken the rules to bring her information she needed, who had been covering for her and covering with her and running alongside her through all of it. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Right now I need to talk to Thorne. Thorne was sitting up in bed with a notepad on his knee again when she came in at 0900. This time he didn't close it when she entered. You heard, he said. Callahan told me, she said. She came to the side of his bed and did her check vitals, dressing the careful hands-on assessment that she did not skip, regardless of what else was happening. How do you feel about it? My father's statement. He watched her hands move through the check. I feel like it was the right thing. I feel like it was overdue. He paused. I also feel like it's going to land on you in ways that are complicated. And I want to know if you're prepared for that. She finished the check. She stood up straight. What do you think I'm not prepared for? He looked at her steadily. Visibility, he said. You are very good at being indispensable without being visible. You do everything right and you let the work speak for itself. And you have never in the entire time I've been here sought attention for any of it. He held her gaze. That changes now. Your name is in a Senate statement. There are journalists at the gate. In a week, maybe less people outside this hospital are going to have opinions about you. People who have never been inside a helicopter or a field hospital or a war zone are going to feel qualified to comment on your decisions and your value and your, he stopped. I want to know if you're ready for that. She was quiet for a moment. It was a real question and it deserved a real answer. No, she said. I don't think anyone is ready for that until it happens. She picked up his chart and made her notes. But I've been not ready for things before. I was not ready for Firebase Kilo. I was not ready for the 14th. She paused. Not ready seems to be my natural state. I function fine in it. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the thing that lives near a smile. B, he said, for what it's worth. Whatever comes from this, whatever changes or doesn't change, the men who are on those helicopters are going to be telling this story for the rest of their lives. Every man who was in that aircraft, in this hospital, in this ward. They're going to tell their children, their grandchildren. He held her gaze. Not because a senator said your name in Washington, because you came, because you were there and you knew what to do, and you did it without hesitation and without asking for anything in return. She looked at him for a long moment, at the young lieutenant who had refused to let anyone else treat him, who had trusted her with his life in the belly of a helicopter. "Get some rest," she said. "We're going to talk about discharge tomorrow morning." "That's not a response to what I just said," he said. "No," she agreed, "it's not." And she walked out. In the corridor, she stopped. She put her hand flat against the wall. One breath, two. The thing Thorne had said was sitting in her chest in a way that made it hard to be as efficient as she needed to be. And she was not going to allow that, not in the middle of a shift, not with 22 patients on active monitoring, and a ward that still needed her present and functional. She took a third breath. She straightened. She went back to work. At 10:40, Halloway came to find her. Oh, this was notable in itself, Halloway finding her coming to where she was rather than summoning her. She was in the medication room, which was where he had found her 4 days ago, to deliver the apology that had reconfigured something in her understanding of him, and she wondered briefly if he had chosen this room deliberately. If there was some recognition in him that this was where the honest things happened. He looked better than he had 5 days ago. Not rested, she wasn't sure Halloway ever truly rested, but resolved. The quality of a man who has made his peace with a situation and is now operating within it rather than fighting the shape of it. The review panel issued its preliminary findings this morning, he said. "I heard it," she said. "I've been formally relieved of authority over nursing staff assignments," he said. That authority is being restructured into a separate command track, reporting directly to the medical colonel. He said it without inflection, reporting facts. "Additionally, I've been informed that a formal letter of reprimand is being placed in my file regarding the incident in Ward C." She said nothing. "I'm telling you this," he said, "because I think you should know, not because I want anything from you." He paused. "I don't want your forgiveness. I don't think I've earned it, and I don't think it's yours to give on behalf of everyone this has affected." He looked at her. "But I want you to know that I understand what I did, the full weight of it, not just the incident, the pattern." He held her gaze. 8 months of it. The medication room was very still. "The cases I excluded you from it," he said. "The flags you raised that I routed around. The morning I found you in Ward C and made a decision about your value in 30 seconds based on the way you walk." He paused and his voice went to a place she had not heard it go before. Not lower exactly, but deeper, less performed. "I am a good surgeon. I have always been a good surgeon, and I have spent my career in rooms where being good was the primary currency, and somewhere along the way I developed the habit of protecting my position in those rooms by controlling who else was allowed to be good." His jaw tightened. "That habit nearly cost your patients their lives. That is not something I am going to be able to walk away from." She looked at him. At this complicated, flawed, genuinely talented man who had put his hands on her and sent her to count bedpans and then stood in front of 30 wounded Marines and had to hear them refuse to move without her. "No," she said quietly, "it's not." She held his gaze. "But what you do with that is still yours to choose." He nodded once, the way he always nodded when something was concluded. "The Senate statement," he said. "Senator Thorne?" "Yes," she said. "It's going to bring attention to this facility," he said. "To you." He paused. "I want you to know that I will not be an obstacle to whatever comes from that attention." He straightened slightly, and in the straightening was the last of the performance falling away. No clipboard, no authority, no second skin of rank. Just a man standing in a medication room telling the truth. Whatever you become after this, whatever this story makes possible for you, you earned it, every piece of it. She held his gaze for a long moment. "Thank you, Major," she said. He walked out. She stood where she was for exactly 1 minute. Then she went back to work. At 1300, Sergeant Briggs took his first steps. She was there for it. She had arranged to be there for it, clearing her schedule around his physical therapy window, with the careful unofficial maneuvering she had spent 8 months perfecting. He stood up from the bed with the support of a physical therapy corpsman on one side and the absolute refusal of a staff sergeant to show anything on his face that could be interpreted as weakness. He stood. He took one step, then another. His face was the color of old paper, and his jaw was working the way it worked when he was spending everything on staying quiet, and she watched all of it with the focused attention of a clinician and the less categorizable attention of someone who had been the reason this man was standing instead of not standing. Good, she said. Stop there. That's enough for today. I can do more, he said. I know you can, she said. You're not going to. Lieutenant, Sergeant Briggs, she said. You have a bullet wound in your thigh and a fresh surgical repair underneath it. You can do more in 3 days. Today, 2 steps is correct. She held his gaze. Trust me. He looked at her. He sat back down. You know, he said, breathing carefully through the pain he was not showing, every man who comes through that door over the last 5 days asks me the same question. What question, she said. Whether Angel 6 is as extraordinary as everyone says. He settled back against the pillow. I tell them she's better, and then they don't believe me. And then they meet you and they understand. She checked his wound without responding to this. The sutures were intact. The tissue was healthy. Everything was exactly as it should be. You're healing well, she said. Be calm, he said. Her first name plainly without the rank. She let it go. Are you going to talk to the journalists? She paused for just a fraction of a second in her work. Who told you there were journalists? Carter, he said. Of course, she said. Are you, he said. She finished her check. She stood. She thought about the Washington Post, about her name in a Senate statement, about visibility, the thing Thorne had warned her about that morning, the thing she had spent 8 months carefully, deliberately avoiding. If talking to them helps change something structural, she said, then yes. If it's just about the story, just about the drama of the supply shed and the helicopter and the needle, then no. She looked at him. I'm not interested in being a story. I'm interested in the thing the story could make possible. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Firebase Kilo, 31 men. You came out in the dark with a field kit, and you worked until every man was accounted for. Do you know what we talked about afterward when we had time to talk? No, she said. We talked about what kind of person does that? He said, not the skill, not the training. What kind of person? Who you have to be inside to walk towards something like that instead of away from it. He held her gaze. We couldn't figure it out. We argued about it. Some of the men thought it was courage. Some thought it was duty. Carter thought it was something he couldn't name. He paused. I think it's simpler than all of that. I think you don't see a choice. I think when there's a person in front of you who needs what you can give, you just go. There's no calculation, no heroism, just the going. She was very still. That's what needs to be in the newspapers, he said. Not the needle, not the helicopter. That, the going. He looked at her steadily. Tell that story, B. Because there are people out there, women nurses, soldiers, people who limp, who need to know that the going is enough. That doing your job with everything you have in the face of everything that tries to stop you is enough. She stood with his chart in her hands and the weight of what he had said sitting in her chest alongside the folded paper from Corporal Webb that was still there pressed flat that she had not taken out and would not take out until she was alone and had the minute she needed to feel it. Rest, she said. Her voice was completely steady. She walked out. In the corridor, she allowed herself half a minute, not a full minute, half, and then she went to find Maria. Tell the communications office, she said when she found her. One interview, one journalist. The facts of the structural issue, not the personal narrative. And I choose the questions. Maria stared at her. You're going to do it. Half of it, B said, on my terms. Maria looked like she might cry, which was so unlike Maria that B took a half step back. Don't, B said. We have rounds. B, Maria said. Rounds, B said, and she kept walking. At 1500, Thorne sent for her. She found him sitting on the edge of his bed, not lying down, sitting on the edge, feet on the floor, the posture of a man who has made a decision and is ready to be upright for it. He had changed out of the hospital gown and into fatigues that someone had brought from his kit. He looked like a soldier again, except for the pallor and the dressing on his chest and the IV port still taped to his forearm. You're not supposed to be sitting like that, she said. I know, he said. I have something to say, and I needed to be sitting like this to say it. He looked at her directly. I'm being transferred. My father arranged it. Walter Reed for the remainder of my recovery. He paused. I leave tomorrow morning. She had not expected this. She processed it with the same controlled efficiency She processed everything, but underneath the processing was something that surprised her, a genuine pang of something that was not quite lost, but was in the neighborhood of it. Walter Reed is a good facility, she said. I know, he said. That's not... He stopped. I want to say something to you before I go. Something I've been trying to figure out how to say since the helicopter. She waited. You saved my life, he said. That's the simple version. The longer version is that you saved my life after the system that was supposed to protect you had just spent the morning humiliating you. After a man with authority over you had put his hands on you and called you a liability and sent you to count bedpans. His voice was even, but his eyes were not. And you didn't carry that into the helicopter. Not one atom of it. You came in, you looked at me, and all you saw was the problem you needed to solve. He held her gaze. I've been trying to understand how a person does that, how you separate what's been done to you from what you need to do. She looked at the young lieutenant with his soldier's posture and his pre-med knowledge and the scar he was going to carry for the rest of his life. You don't separate it, she said. You carry it with you. Every unfair thing, every dismissal, every morning someone looked at the way you walk and decided what you were worth, you carry all of it. She paused. But you decide what it's for. You decide whether it becomes the reason you stop or the reason you don't. She held his gaze. I decided a long time ago what it was for. Thorne was quiet. Something moved through his face, something young and real and undisguised. My father is going to push for the congressional review, he said, the full structural review of nursing authority in field hospitals. It's going to take time. It's going to face resistance. He looked at her. But it's going to happen because of what happened here, because of you, because of 30 Marines who wouldn't get off 4 helicopters, she said. Because of why they wouldn't get off, he said. She put his chart back in its holder. She straightened. She looked at this young man who had trusted her with his life and who had in the days since used every resource available to him to make sure that trust had consequences beyond the two of them. Thank you, Lieutenant Thorne, she said, for all of it. Jonathan, he said for the last time. Jonathan, she said, and she let herself mean it. Get better. Go home. Do something good with the years you're keeping. Yes, ma'am, he said, and he meant it the same way he always had. She walked out. She did not look back. She didn't need to. At 1700, the shift change brought in the evening staff, and B should have gone. Her body knew it. The deep ache in her hip was telling her the accumulated weight of 5 days of running hard, of doing the work of 3 people because the work needed doing. She should have gone to her quarters and slept. She stayed for 1 more hour. At 18:10, she was at the nursing station completing the last of her charts when she became aware of a presence at the edge of the ward. She looked up. Carter. Briggs beside him in a wheelchair, which meant someone had helped him to it, which meant he had asked someone to help him, which meant he had wanted to be somewhere badly enough to swallow his pride about the wheelchair. A third Marine she didn't recognize stood behind the chair. And behind all of them, filling the doorway with his broad-shouldered stillness, was Senator William Thorne. She set down her pen. They came toward her. Briggs first wheeled to the front, and when he was close enough, he reached into the pocket of his hospital shirt and pulled out something small and held it out to her. She took it. It was a pin. Military issue, but worn not new, not ceremonial. The kind of thing a man carries for years. An eagle, wings extended. That came from Firebase Kilo, Briggs said. It's been passed from man to man in the 3rd Battalion for 6 months. Every man who was there that night has held it. He looked at her steadily. We want you to have it. She looked at the pin in her palm, at the worn metal, the weight of it, the years of hands that had held it. Briggs, she said, and her voice was not entirely steady, which was rare enough that it surprised her. Don't argue, he said, for once. She closed her hand around it. The senator stepped forward. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in his son's room 5 days ago, with the focused attention of a man who sees clearly and says what he sees. Lieutenant Galloway, he said, I want you to know what I told the Armed Services Committee yesterday. He didn't look at notes. He didn't pause for effect. He spoke plainly the way she had come to understand was his real register underneath the performance of politics. I told them that I have spent 22 years in public service and that in that time I have met very few people who define the phrase. That the woman who saved my son's life had been told she was a liability by the man who was supposed to be her commanding officer. that she went from a supply shed to a helicopter to an operating room in a single morning, saving lives at every stop without asking for recognition or thanks or reinstatement. And that if we want to understand what service actually looks like, not the decorated version, not the one we put on posters, we should look at that morning. The ward was completely quiet. The evening shift staff had stopped moving. Patients who were awake were watching. Bea stood at the nursing station with the worn eagle pin pressed in her hand and the senator's words in the air around her, and she felt the full weight of everything. The last 5 days had been not just the events, but what they meant, what they could become, what they were already in the process of becoming. And she held it. She didn't cry. That wasn't how she was built, but she held it, all of it, for a full breath. Then she looked at the senator, at Briggs, at Carter, who was watching her with his steady eyes and his bandaged arm, and the expression of a man who held flashlights exactly where they needed to be. "I want you to know something," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the way quiet voices carry in quiet rooms. "All of you. Everything that happens next, the review, the congressional inquiry, whatever changes come from it, that's important. That matters. I believe it matters." She paused. "But it's not why I went to the helicopter." No one spoke. "I went because he was there," she said. "Because the work was there, because it has always been that simple for me, and I hope it always will be." She looked at each of them in turn. "The system that tried to stop me was wrong. It should be changed. We should fight to change it. But the choice to go toward the thing that needs doing, regardless of what's been done to you, that's not a fight. That's just who you are." "Or it isn't." She held Briggs' gaze. "I went because I could not go. That's the whole story." The room held it. Then Briggs said roughly, "Well," and looked away at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked back. "Yeah," he said, "that's what we figured." Carter made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite not one. The Marine behind the wheelchair put a hand briefly on Briggs' shoulder. The senator looked at Bea with the expression of a man who has heard the real thing and knows it. She straightened. She looked at the nursing station, at the charts still in their holders, the monitors doing their patient-faithful work, the ward full of men who were still here because someone had gone toward the thing instead of away from it. "It's my shift," she said. "I need to finish my charts." Briggs laughed, actually laughed low and real, and it cost him something in his leg, but he didn't stop. Carter shook his head. The senator, for just a moment, smiled. She turned back to the nursing station. She picked up her pen. She opened the next chart, and she wrote what needed to be written with the same meticulous, unfailing attention she brought to every chart, every patient, every morning she woke up and chose the going over the staying. Outside the hospital, the war continued. Inside it, 30 men breathed and healed and lived because she had been there. Her left foot ached. The eagle pin was in her breast pocket now, pressed flat beside Corporal Webb's folded message, 2 small, heavy things against her heart. She finished the chart. She started the next one. Lieutenant Beatrice Galloway, the nurse they told to stay back, the woman they called a liability, the limping lieutenant they sent to count bedpans on the morning the helicopters came, was exactly where she had always belonged. And this time everyone knew it.